Welcome to the Pointy End. I'm Keith Sutherland. Today my guest is Councillor James Williams after quite a fiery debate on one of the particular topics. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Keith. Great to be here again.
Now, there's three topics we'll just touch on briefly. The first one was the McGuinness Street Big Hill School. Councillor Barry Lyons suggested that this matter be deferred. The petition was on. Should that have really come to council? Because it seemed to me that there wasn't as much homework and wasn't as much debate as there should have been with the community, because a lot of concerned parents and grandparents out there. So should that really have been on the agenda? I know it was a petition, but it just seemed to be, it was there, and then all of a sudden it's not there after a bit of debate. Yeah,
look, it's interesting, isn't it? When a petition comes, we move a motion usually that we need to respond within 2 meetings. So it's a requirement, I guess, that we have within our rules. One of the officers actually visited that site, but there were questions raised, I guess, during question time that maybe required further, I guess, consultation. Those councillors in that board believe there could be a lot gained by going and talking to them. It's an issue that's not, I guess, about that area alone. We've got it right across Bendigo with a growing city and a growing population. Epsom's another great example where we're locked beside a major truck route, a creek on the other side. So these issues aren't uncommon. We believe there's a state responsibility as well. They build the flaming things and they expect us to retrofit them around the edges. We see it all the time.
Yep.
We'll do what we can.
Sort of traffic management was also a fire safety thing. But anyway, we'll move on with the next one, which was traffic management again, was the Cronk Street now. Intersection changes and all sorts of things, and that's a very expensive process because you've got around about 350,000, wanting to try and reduce the speed down to 50. You've got another blisters on the side of the road, 220,000, another 52,000. It's very expensive just for one street. And if you have it in one street like Cronk Street, there's got to be plenty of other streets around Bendigo that have similar problems. Where do you go? Where do you stop with these sorts of things?
And I think you've summed it up pretty well, Keith. What we moved was that the 50 speed limits just be repeated down there to warn people. We've asked police to take a more active role there. People use it as a shortcut through there. There are other streets that require more treatment. It's very expensive, and I think it's very unlikely that those issues you spoke about will actually be funded by council at this stage. We've said we'll go away, we'll look at it, monitor it over the next 12 months. But there are a lot of other streets in a similar situation.
Okay, the other one that was an interesting one, 348 High Street, 61 lot stage subdivision. The motion last night was to rescind council decision of the 10th of September 2014 to refuse a permit after consultation. It's a funny one, this, because sometimes I see it, you get very passionate about saving vegetation. Last night we wipe out the vegetation, we go along with the low-lying bridge. It was knocked out last time, it's approved now. What's the change of heart? Has there been discussion that maybe should have been had way back then?
Oh, look, I think so. I was concerned last time when I voted in support of the developer that it should have been allowed through, and I spoke that way. I'm passionate about the vegetation, always will be, Keith. This is a very different issue. We have very little say in regards to that in terms of this block. What they did was tried to work with that difficult environment they had there. Some councillors felt they needed better access for the community across that creek. That was the stumbling block. That's been addressed and council have come on board with that. Council officers believe that there wasn't enough meat in the argument if it had gone to VCAT. So I'm very pleased that it came back and was rescinded. I voted for it to be approved the first time. And ultimately we came to that decision through discussion with them. So it's a good outcome for everyone.
Good to be on the winning side now.
Got to occasionally.
The big one for the night was the Hopley at 27 to 51 Powell's Street, Bendigo, the recycling proposal.
Yes.
And there was a lot of passion, a lot of comments that came out of it, particularly from Councillor Chapman, Councillor Leach.
Yep.
And I see Councillor Mayor Cox voted against this proposal, but it went through as per the recommendation, 6-3. Seems to me that there is a lot of debate and I'm not quite sure what's happening, and they understand that all these surveys and having to scientific things to understand where the site, where it sits, it's an old tip site of course, whether it should be there, and whether he should be paying a fee, and there was all sorts of arguments that no, he's not because he hasn't got a permit to do this. Tell us a little bit about it, because there seems to be a lot of history, and I've listened to the debate at council, I've listened to the gallery, because there's some support, some don't, but there was no objections to the proposal. So where do we go?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, Keith, but council has a responsibility. Council do not own the land, it is Crown land. Council closed the site some 14, 15 years ago and met their obligations in terms of capping it. The science changed, the understanding's changed. You'll be familiar with some of the legal cases in Melbourne around those sites and the gas that was generated from it. So the realisation has become that there are issues and long-term issues associated with these tips. That's what the monitoring's about. The environmental law and the requirements from the EPA have changed. They issued council with a notice to clean up the site some 4 or 5 years ago. So that's when we needed to respond. Up until then, we believe we'd rehabilitated the site to an adequate level. That's not the case, according to the EPA. So therefore, we've now got to go back, retrofit that site for monitoring. Gases are generated over time, leachates move over time. We have to understand where the groundwater's moving to. We also have to understand if there is pollution within that groundwater. You can't just go down, dig a hole, monitor it for 5 minutes, check the water and come out. That moves, the pollution moves, the gas moves. The report that was spoken about, we actually haven't seen. It was an interim report, not a final report.
Can I just pick up on that? But why haven't you seen it? Because you're debating it, and that was the point that Councillor Chapman was really passionate about, and Councillor Leach. You haven't seen the report. Why haven't you, as councillors, when you have to make a determination on it?
I think she was right that we should have seen it, and we will see it in the not too distant future. There was some issues, I guess, legalities around that, being an interim report. But to say that we haven't seen the report and then to say that there are no gas issues, there are no pollution issues, I mean, is just a total contradiction in itself. And that was the problem. I mean, she contradicted herself on several comments in regards to the tip site. To say council have done nothing over the last 14 years is just wrong. We met our obligations. Those obligations have changed. Our understanding of old tip sites have changed. Our EPA requirements have changed. We've actually challenged the EPA in regards to that through the independent review. We looked at all our old tip sites on the understanding of the new laws and the associated issues that are drawn out, the environmental requirements. Wollstonecroft, we've had to go back and monitor that. We've had to look at our other tip sites. There's been a total review of the whole lot. So council have put a lot of work in, I guess, not just that site, but a number of sites around Bendigo. We'll have to go back and rehabilitate some of the others. We won a legal case against the EPA in regards to Eaglehawk tip and the rehabilitation there. So what would you say? We've possibly saved our ratepayers, in the vicinity of $10 to $20 million just through that one legal case. If they applied current law and current understanding, I guess, to some of the rehabilitation of those old tip sites, would be a long way in and a lot of work to do. The case of Hopley is we all support his business, we love what he does, we just want to see him, I guess, do what he says he will do. He agreed to be out of there by May. We don't believe there's been a genuine attempt to do so. There has been opportunity in terms of relocating or purchasing other sites. We want to see him actually, on his side of the agreement. The officers actively helped him move there, and I understand that, and they did that in genuine good faith on the understanding that it wasn't a permanent site. He just needs to work with council and VCAT now. Unfortunately, we see VCAT in the process as being the best way forward. We don't believe, and again it was said, we have a 1 month agreement with, I guess, the owners and the managers. We're the managers of that site, and we have obligations with the EPA. We don't believe putting that site at risk by having someone working there, that is appropriate for the city or an appropriate risk for our ratepayers. If something happened to that cap while he was working on it, etc., it opens up to all sorts of liabilities. We still don't know the detail of the groundwater, of the pollution, of what's happening there. When we've got those figures, and if it comes through fine, I'd be more than happy to see it reopen. But again, we would need to negotiate that with the state government, the landowners, and they would have to be comfortable with the fact that, I guess, the tip had been properly rehabilitated, that the pollution wasn't an issue, and that then would be an appropriate use for the site. So there's a whole raft of issues and a huge history there, Keith.
All right, well, we'll move on to something that you're very passionate about, the airport. Now, where are we at with that? It's an exciting future down there, but got some funding from the federal government, etc. When's things going to happen?
Oh, look, Keith, they can't happen quick enough, but dated piece of infrastructure. What's happened recently is through an initiative of mine and my business partners, I was able to arrange a meeting in Queensland with John Wagner. I flew to Queensland and went out to Toowoomba. That's Queensland or Brisbane's alternative airport, fully funded by the Wagner Corporation. John showed me around $200 million worth of infrastructure already. You can land a 747 on his runway, it's 3 kilometres long, there's 9 metre of fill under it. He said that cost $100 million and his airport cost $100 million, sitting out in 500 hectares, which he owns, and he's going to build the business park around it. I said, where's the return in it, John? And he said, well, I'll pull $50 to $60 million a year out of this. Cathay Pacific will be flying out of there to Hong Kong in the not too distant future. They've already got, I think, something like 200 movements a day out of there. He's taken a long-term vision, a long-term view to his investment or their investment. And I asked him, I said, would you be interested in building us a runway? He indicated he would, and he asked about the management of the airport. He said, we are in the airport business. He is the last person and company to build a major airport in Australia, and it's a long time since we've seen that happen. He has the understanding and he knows what it takes. It is a difficult field, there's a lot of regulation, as you can imagine. And I was fortunate he came down yesterday or the day before, spent the day with us. We took him through Keach's casting. He's passionate about the region. He's a Toowoomba boy. He understands the lack of investment by state and federal government in terms of their infrastructure around the regions, and he believes we need to do a lot more in those areas. The airport is something I identified very early in the piece as holding this city back, and it'll generate business, I think, that we haven't even thought about at this stage. There's tourism, there's just a whole raft of opportunities. He had a look at it and he said, you are building what will give you 20 to 30 years good service. He believes it's appropriate for now. He invested a lot further because he has a lot bigger vision and he's capable of doing that. Toowoomba has a lot of demographics very similar to Bendigo. It's a similarly positioned in regards to its capital city. It is a bigger city, but it has a university, it has a hospital. I drove him around, I pointed out the development, I pointed out what was happening, how quickly this city was growing, the new hospital. John was fascinated, he loved the place. And you know, he said it's a joke that we have an airport and a piece of infrastructure this old and this dated, you know, in a city of this size with the dynamics it has. He was fantastic. He's expressed an interest. We'll talk to him. He said he'll help out where he can. Fantastic, very open fellow. Business interests all over the world, and passionate about regional Australia. So I think it's fair to say him and me fairly share that passion, Keith.
Well, that's good, because the thing that's always worried me is that we're so close to Tullamarine. We're not going to get a Cathay Pacific coming to Bendigo. We've got a great population, but yeah, it's not Toowoomba. It just seems to me that we're on a smaller scale, and that's all it can be, a smaller scale. But it's the allied stuff that we can get, the business park that goes with the airport and all the extra land. And that's where I see the real advantages. I'm not so sure about ever getting a major, we're never going to get a Jetstar to come to here or anything like that sort of airline. So it's a lot of money to invest into something that we are just that little bit closer than what Toowoomba is from Brisbane, I dare say.
No, we're not. Toowoomba is closer than us. John would totally disagree with you. He will just tell you straight out that regional travel, our ability to get to these regions. We're looking at Bendigo. Bendigo services an area of 300,000 people. He believes we'll have people travelling from Castlemartin and Kyneton to come to Bendigo to fly to Sydney. He said the routes are not to Melbourne, they will be everywhere else. Q-Link, Rex are the two airlines that we've targeted in terms of the size of the building. He said that's correct. He said we've got a lot of things right in terms of the design, and he also pointed out a few things that we needed to do. So
we've got very sufficient land about it. Have we to expand it as much as we want it?
Oh, absolutely, Keith. Council, in that respect, have worked very hard to purchase the appropriate land. We are only waiting on the Minister to sign off on the authority, and then it's more about the airspace in terms of the airport itself as we develop from there. There's a number of other issues around security and things like that that we will need to consider. John just believes a $15 million investment's probably worth $200 million to us, you know, in terms of what we will bring and in terms of business, in terms of travel, in terms of the whole thing. As with Toowoomba, he said, you know, it's a growing city. If governments are keen and serious about getting people out of major cities, they have to provide jobs, they have to provide infrastructure in the regions. This is only the first of a number of projects we need to do.
All right, finally, hasn't been a good look for Alhambra Theatre.
No.
We've had these people on the front there, haven't been paid, tradespeople. And I wanted to know whose responsibility. It seems to people believe it's council. Is it the education department, state government? Where do we go? Because we've got the magnificent theatre. It's pity that we've got all this fighting after the event, because there's the Writers' Festival coming up there. There's lots of other events coming up there. Mary Poppins last weekend. It's not a great look. Magnificent theatre we've got. What's going wrong? Whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, look, very, very disappointing, the publicity, very disappointing that those contractors and local contractors haven't been paid. The contract was sublet to a contract group, and I believe, having heard that we've spoken to the state government about it, state government have paid that contract. The contractor needs to pass on those funds and sign off on those contracts. It's a dispute between the initial contractor and the subcontractors. It's disappointing. It paints the whole project in a bad light, and it is a great project. City Council managed the project. We managed that under a contract with the contractor. The contractor then sublet those contracts. So we've gone back to the government. The government have indicated they have paid up. They've gone back to the contractor and said, you need to fix this up. I think everyone's disappointed, Keith, and it needs to be rectified.
At the end of the day, there was a lot of extra work to get it done on time for the opening night, and it was a magnificent opening night. But at the end of the time, did people sign off on those extensions? If they worked day and night outside trying to get it done, there would be a lot of overtime. It would be over budget, and nobody knows how much over budget, but it has to be a substantial amount of money, in my opinion. I'm no expert at this, but I just worry that, and if you say the council was overseeing the project, does the buck stop with them because all these extra overruns have been done and it hasn't been signed off? Am I correct in thinking that or not?
No, in terms of that, the council would have negotiated that with the contractor, and the contractor would have, I guess, negotiated those overruns with council. They then go and subcontract that, so there's an agreement. They then go and subcontract that, I guess, and negotiate with their subcontractors. I'm very disappointed that that hasn't been paid up, and I don't blame the subcontractors. There are obligations there and they need to be paid. Yeah, it is a disappointing outcome at this stage. Let's hope it's rectified very soon.
All right, thanks, well, James, thank you so much for appearing on the Pointy End. A big night last night. It's always a big night at council meetings, and it's great to have you on board today, because we've had a couple of councillors that have been knocking us back for whatever reasons, but it's good to listen to you firsthand from what happened last night, and it's always great to have you on the Pointy End.
Oh, look, really appreciate it, Keith, and it's a great forum for us to get the message out there. It's very easy to, I guess, misconstrue things or misunderstand things, and I understand, you know, even the debate around Hopleys, it's a lot more complicated than people realise, and law's a very difficult thing at times.
Absolutely.
Frustrating, you know, given the constraints that it places on you, you know, even the discussion around Alhambra. And I've got to admit, you know, I struggle to get my head around the depth and breadth of what this city now requires in terms of, I guess, infrastructure work and what council actually, the expectation of people on council. Thanks, Keith.
Well, thank you very much, James.